Hello, my name is Kiriath, and today we are going to talk about the revamp of White Dwarf, and specifically one particular part of the revamp of White Dwarf. Now, I know this is a little bit old news because it was went on the 24th of December, which is Christmas Eve. I was already well away in terms of drink and food by that point, so I missed it. But I think that's fair. Incidentally, I hope you had a good Christmas. And if you didn't have a Christmas and instead just had a normal day, I hope you had a relaxing normal day because everyone else was most likely doing Christmassy things. So there is going to be a revamp of White Dwarf. It's starting in January, and it looks pretty good, as they say in the Warhammer community article, which is linked down below. Each month, you'll be treated to regular columns by the game's rules and background writers, short stories set in the grim darkness of the far future, of course, battle reports, and army showcases. And it's going to be there every time, so 40k will have its own dedicated section. I would imagine exactly the same thing will happen for Age of Sigmar. That would make sense, but actually having them consistently there every time, that's nice. That's a good thing. And you'll also be treated to brand new rules and background for Warhammer 40,000 every month. Check out the awesome section opener in January's issue. And in January's issue, it is Crimson Fist. And that is because there is an article called Index Astartes which is making a return to White Dwarf. And that is the thing that I am most excited about. See, occasionally it can feel as though there is a very, very heavy focus on, well, not just on Ultramarines. I was going to say on Ultramarines. That is true. There is a very heavy focus on Ultramarines, but there are like the big chapters. The big chapters that will always get a little bit more than the other chapters. And actually having the acknowledgement of smaller chapters is genuinely something that I think is needed. It can get very samey seeing that same colour blue every time, which admittedly is kind of funny because Crimson Fists are also blue, but they're not quite Ultra Smurf blue, so it's not exactly the same thing. Actually having the return of this means that we might start to see some of the lesser known chapters, or the lesser expanded on chapters, finally get a bit more of their own identity. They might actually start to get more of a background, more of a story. If they're having things like, relics and traits and stratagems and chapter tactics, we could genuinely start to see more of a push to get people to step away from what I would. When I say the safe option, I don't know what I mean with the safe option, but it feels sometimes like Ultramarines are the standard option. They are the one that most people go for because Games Workshop are the ones who push them the most, which they do. Now, that's not to say that just because White Dwarf starts featuring rules for other chapters, there's going to be a sudden lack of people playing Ultramarines. No, that's not going to be the case at all. But it is just nice to have more variety, more fleshed out additions to the Space Marine chapters as a whole. And it's not just the fact that it's things like Crimson Fist. There are chapters that have interesting background and interesting lore that don't really have any sort of expansion upon that basic foundation. There are chapters that have names and have kind of little stories behind them that you think could have some sort of interesting mechanic to represent that, but don't, because they were never really touched on that much. I can think of, is it the Blood Angels? Is the Angels Repentant? There is one specific chapter for like Blood Angel Successors, which looks really interesting but doesn't really have any sort of expanded story to it. Index Astartes coming back actually means that we could see more in the way of decent lore and decent story for chapters that don't really get the attention that they deserve. Not only that, but one of the biggest, not misses, not failures, but one of the things that I've always felt is most lacking about like the Cursed Founding, for instance, is a lack of rules that represent the chapters that were founded during the Cursed Founding. I forget the names of all of them. I think there's one, is it the Sons of Antaeus, that are supposed to be like just rock hard, like their bones are ridiculously strong, unarmoured, they are basically unkillable. Obviously, difficult to represent that on the tabletop, but it would be nice to see things like chapters from the Cursed Founding actually get tactics and stratagems and relics that properly reflect the nature of their existence. The fact that they have these weird problems that the other chapters don't have, that are both a help and a hindrance. Is it the Bone Dragons? Is that what they're called? The ones who have like the crazy bone growth that come out of like their arms and stuff. You could actually properly represent that. The way that 8th is built, the way that things have been done now, you could actually have these properly represented with a decent like kind of subset of their own rules that would properly show off what these chapters can do. That's the thing that's exciting me the most. There is the fact that we are at the point now where you cannot avoid repeats. There's no way to do it. You know, chapter tactics, warlord traits, stratagems, relics. There's maybe not relics actually. No, that's not fair. But it's difficult to be completely unique when it comes to tactics and traits and stratagems. It's going to be difficult because there are so many armies and there's so many kind of subsets of armies that the number of options you have just doesn't match up to the number of, well, options you have in terms of force selection. But by combining the right ones and actually taking existing ones that you're going to have to copy and paste at some point, you can still get that feel. You can still actually properly represent chapters with what they should have. One of the things that is great about 40k for me is being able to pick the thing that you want, pick the colour scheme you like, pick the chapter, pick the army, whatever. You then get to choose the personality of that force through your chapter tactics, through your stratagems, through your relics, through your warlord traits. But there are certain chapters, there are certain, Chaos Warbands that don't really neatly fit into any of the existing rule sets. They don't quite slot in with any of the existing combinations. Actually having more to choose from is never going to be a bad thing, because the more Index Astartes we have, and I'm hoping that they don't just apply to standard, like to loyal Space Marines. I would hope that, like the old column did, it would be encompassing some chaos stuff as well. That'd be kind of nice. You're actually going to get more choice, and you'll be able to represent your chapter the way that you want them represented a bit better on the tabletop. Like my example, my kind of feel of this comes from personal experience, whereby my Scar Lords that you can see over there on the two shelves there, I basically got them from, I think it was like a single line in, which Tau Codex was it? Was it the third or the fourth one? They're one of the Tau Codexes, where it talks about a Tau hero whose name I cannot remember, who defeats a warrior king of the Scar Lords by trapping them in some sort of temporal field bullshit, so they're just frozen in time, just locked together, about to have a massive fight. And, he took him out with that. The phrasing of that, the fact that the Tau referred to him as a warrior king, now, that is probably entirely down to a translation thing of the Tau. That is probably something that is just solely down to the way they see things as opposed to an actual title. But I love the description of a warrior king of the Scar Lords. And so, out of that, I was like, well, I want this chapter to be a bit more feral, a bit more brutal, a bit more tribal than most other Space Marine chapters. I'd like that represented. I'd like the fact that, they're called the Scar Lords, having some sort of marking on the armour to dictate where they've been injured in battle and allowed the wound to heal naturally without, having anything done to reduce scarring or anything like that. Copying those wounds onto their armour with the use of, like, rust or, just taking a chainsaw to it. I liked that idea of having that kind of chapter. But the problem is that there was nothing really that actually fit that image I had in my head of who these guys are. When I built that army, it was a Strike Force Ultra with a small allied detachment that was just there so I could put my Centurions in, because I really liked the Centurions at the time. And there was not really anything in the Space Marines Codex where I looked at it and went, that suits them. That fits. That chapter, that like chapter tactic equivalent, I can't remember whether they were called chapter tactics or not now, but that is what works for this army. I didn't get that for any of them. In the end, I ended up using the Carcharodon Astra. I ended up using that rule set from Forge World, because that was the only thing I could find that really fit what the Scar Lords were in my head. not having to go to somewhere like Forge World, not having to use a rule set like that, and actually just having a constant expansion, a constant stream of supplemental content for essentially the Space Marines Codex, and hopefully Codex Chaos Space Marines as well, out of like Index Astartes, that is perfect. That is absolutely perfect. I cannot be happier about this particular thing, because anything that increases the amount of choice, anything that increases the ability to represent the personality of not just your custom chapters, but just the lesser expanded on chapters as a whole, hands down, great idea. So I think it is actually now at the point where with this revamp, White Dwarf will genuinely be worth getting every single time. I haven't felt like that's the case for a while, if I'm absolutely honest, but I'm going to pick up the January one, and if it's decent, that's just going to become a running subscription, because I like the direction they've taken it, and I like the opportunities for customization and proper like representation of personality that kind of thing will give. So yeah, that is the thing I'm most excited about the White Dwarf revamp. What are you most excited about? Are you bothered? Are you not bothered? Have you been religiously reading White Dwarf this whole time and you think it's been pretty good so far and didn't need the change? Do you think it does need the change? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. In the meantime, feel free to click the things. Clicky, video, Patreon, subscribe, all that shit. Click it if you like. Don't click it if you don't want to. And I will see you for the next one. Toodaloo.